Hello, muskets and militants. Aaron here, back with another video. Have you ever wondered what Ramon from Cars would look like if he was a baddie? Well, today's your lucky day. The newest Chevrolet is here. Don't she look dastardly and delicious? Speaking of, you wanna know what else is delish? That beignet flavored subscribe button down below. Take a bite, don't be shy. Delectable treats aside, let's get to the point of why we're all here today. Chevreuse. What does she do? How does she work? And how good is she? These are the questions I plan to answer. So, with my horrendous intro out of the way, let's hop right into the overview. Chevreuse is an all-purpose electro and pyro support unit with an emphasis on buffing her team through the overload reaction. Her skill has a bunch of fake complexity to it. It has a tap, hold, and enhanced version of her old version. All versions do the same thing though. They all deal burst damage, they apply a heal over time to the on-field character that lasts 12 seconds, and they generate 4 particles with the particle generation cooldown of around 10 seconds. Her tap version deals the least damage but comes out instantly. Her hold version requires a quick sec, but it deals a bit more than her tap. And then finally, the enhanced version of her hold skill requires the overload reaction to occur, but it deals the most damage. Her skill also deals Usia-aligned pyro damage once every 10 seconds. Chevy's burst has her launch an explosion in front of her that leaves 8 additional bombs in an area around where the initial explosion was used, very much like how Ikiki's burst works. The bombs left behind almost immediately explode after they are summoned. Additionally, enemies hit by the secondary bombs will be yoinked towards Chevreuse, similarly to how Yelan's skill yoinks enemies toward her. This is a powerful upside to her burst, especially since the overload reaction knocks enemies away. Then there's Chevreuse First Ascension passive, which is similar to Nilo's. When the party consists of only Electro and Pyro party members, Chevreuse will grant her team the passive effect Coordinated Tactics. When the overload reaction is triggered on an enemy while this passive is in effect, she will reduce the enemy's Electro and Pyro resistances by 40% for 6 seconds. Her Ascension 4 passive effect continues to incentivize the use of overload reactions, as she is able to increase the attack percent of her Electro and Pyro party members after she uses her elemental skills enhanced hold version. This attack percent increase is equal to a portion of her max health, capping at 40,000 HP, which will grant 40% attack. Before we continue any further, I want to quickly explain and address the negative stigma behind the overload reaction that Chevreuse is forced into. Overload is a transformative elemental reaction that deals pyro damage in an AoE. This occurs when Electro is applied to a target afflicted with Pyro, or when Pyro is applied to a target afflicted with Electro. The reaction is almost never used in any team due to issues consisting of knocking away enemies, which leads to a waste of time and stamina having to chase them down and dealing rather low damage in comparison to other reactions. To put it into perspective, it has half the damage and deals damage half as fast as the Virgin reaction can. And Virgin isn't even that insanely strong. It's just a good damaging reaction. This is why Overload is hardly used outside of overvape teams. It simply cannot output enough damage to be taken seriously and is instead used mostly as an additional damage source alongside a team's raw damage output. While this might seem like bad news for Chevreuse, since she excels in Overload teams, her base kit offers enough offensive and defensive utility to allow her team to focus on dealing the most raw damage possible. This is the best case scenario for Overload as a whole, as Chevreuse is able to single-handedly make Overload-focused teams not underwhelming anymore. With that explanation done, let's continue on to our main programming. Chevreuse's talent priority is up next, and thankfully, it is easier than most. Since most of her power comes from her passives, and since her damage is incredibly low, you only really need to level her skill for the extra healing. Level it up till the healing she deals is to a comfortable level, then do what you will. The rest matters very little. However, I would personally recommend leveling her skill up to 8, then leave the rest at 1. Next up, we have her combos. The way to play Chevreuse is a bit different than most others, but it is very reminiscent of Bennett when paired with Xiangling. Chevreuse is best used as either the first or second character in the rotation. The only requirement is that an overload needs to occur before Chevreuse uses her skill. This is so her team gets her Ascension 4 attack percent buff. When this is done, simply use her burst and then skill. Then swap through the party, and if she's wielding Favonius in a quick swap comp, proc the passive a second time after the rest of the team has been run through. Next up, we have Chevy's Constellations. Chevreuse First Constellation grants 6 flat energy to every party member other than herself when an overload reaction occurs once per 10 seconds, and only while her Ascension 1's Coordinated Tactics passive is active. This can activate up to twice per rotation, which equates to 12 energy per rotation. This is pretty massive, as it reduces the energy requirement of each teammate by about 30%, which can lead up to a 3% team damage increase. Chevreuse C2 is much worse, as it merely grants her some extra damage and pyro application on her skill, but this effect can only occur once per 10 seconds. This is pretty bad since it increases her personal damage by only about 3%. Considering her personal damage was already some of the worst in the game, this ends up increasing the entire team's damage output by less than 1%. However, these shells have the upside of yoinking enemies towards Chevreuse' current location, just like the bombs on her burst. While this isn't much, it does make her grouping potential a bit better, which I think somewhat makes up for the lackluster damage increase this constellation grants. Her third constellation increases the level of her skill. This leads to about the same damage increase as her last one, but with the benefit of the 20% extra healing that she can now deal. Her C4 is better though, as it allows her hold skill to not go on cooldown after her burst is used. This effect ends after 6 seconds or after her skill fires twice. While this damage increase is practically nothing, and while her skill might have an energy generating cooldown, this can activate her heal for a second time. This healing increase is massive and enables her to act as one of the strongest healing supports in the game. While this doesn't matter as of right now since her healing was already really good, it will matter in just a bit. Chevreuse C5 increases the level of her burst by 3. However, this is only a damage increase and her damage was already bad, so instead of focusing on this Debbie Downer, let's move on to the main event. Chevreuse' final constellation grants allies healed by her skill a 20% pyro and electro damage bonus for 8 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Additionally, this constellation will heal all nearby party members after her skill's heal has been active for 12 seconds. This leads to a massive 44% healing increase, which allows her to surpass most healers, including that of an off-field Kokomi. On top of that, her buffing potential got even better, and since her skill's heal will tick much faster due to her C4, it will allow her to grant max stacks of this buff relatively consistently to every party member. On top of that, this buff is permanent in quick swap teams. This constellation is so freaking insanely good for electro and pyro damage units. This thing is about on par with Fiorina's damage bonus and proves to be just as insane as Fiorina's, as it turns Chevreuse into the best defensive support for every pyro and electro unit in the game. Well, other than Xiangling, but that's just because she really needs that attack buff that Bennett grants her. In any case, this constellation offers such a massive damage bonus that it will end up averaging to be around a 10 to 20% team damage increase depending on the comp. All around, I feel Chevy's constellations are pretty terrible with the exception of her 6, which is beyond phenomenal. Her best ones, other than the constellation that makes her Fiorina, is her first, which offers a good amount of energy generation but only in her specific overload focused teams, and her fourth, which is only really good for stacking the Song of Days Past, and her C6. While her only really good constellation is her 6, I don't see it being mandatory to obtain. She's still very strong in her niche without it. Instead, it opens up her versatility while making her own teams significantly stronger. If anything, I prefer this type of power level spread over that of the other niche supports in the game. Chevy is great in her niche, but still worse than Bennett. Her C6 actually fixes this, unlike most other 4-star buffing supports 6 constellations, while also making her much more versatile. Another thing that I'd love to continue seeing with 4-star units is not making them dysfunctional without certain constellations. It's really nice that Chevreuse has this too. But enough with complimenting Chevreuse for now. We'll get back to that in about 10 seconds. I just need to mention that we're moving on to artifact options before continuing. Chevy has a lot of different artifacts to choose from due to how little she relies on stats. These artifact options open up more if planning to use her as a DPS unit, though I will not be focusing on that here. Starting off, we have Noblesse Oblige, which will be Chevreuse's best artifact set option at the current moment. This set increases her burst's damage output while also buffing the entire team's attack by 20% for 12 seconds. The reason why this is so good on her right now is mainly because some of her best DPS units can snapshot this buff. However, this buff will fall off if she's paired with units that don't scale with attack or just can't snapshot. If that's the case, the new Song of Days Past will surpass it, since the flat damage buff it offers can be used on every character and in every situation. It also got buffed rather recently, putting it just below Noblesse in terms of usefulness on attack scaling characters. If she is ever paired with another character that scales with anything other than attack, this will end up being her best set with no competition. While these two sets are incredibly powerful, Chevreuse can also build into the powerful 4-star sets available, including the Instructor set. This powerful artifact can massively increase the reaction damage dealt by the team. However, it can be relatively hard for Chevreuse to consistently proc and keep active. This will lead to a larger damage increase than that of both Song of Days Past and Noblesse Oblige, but Due to its inconsistent nature, I can't recommend using it. The same can be said for the Exile set, which will decrease the energy required by the team by 6 per unit other than Chevreuse. However, this amount of energy reduction will normally be straight up overkill, so the other sets will usually be much better. Next are the main and substats, which are incredibly simple. What matters most is her team-wide 40% attack buff that's maxed out at 40,000 HP. Reaching this cap is much more important for her team's damage output than anything else, so running her with triple HP on her main stats will be the easiest option. However, if you're trying to min-max, you can go for a healing bonus circlet for the extra healing it'll grant, or a crit rate circlet if using the Favonius Lance. For substats, that 40k HP cap for her team-wide 40% attack buff will lead to the largest team damage increase, so as stated before, reaching it is imperative. Other than that, not much is really needed. Her energy requirement is incredibly small, since the most she'll need will be about 160%. However, in most situations, this requirement will be more around 105%, which is just about a single substat's worth. If she is using Favonius Lance, getting a decent 33% or higher crit rate stat is incredibly valuable to consistently activate the passive. After that, focusing on more crit or attack percent for her own personal damage output will be better than pumping her full of more HP. Next up, we have her weapon options. Here, her all-around best weapons drastically outweigh any other options. For supportive weapons, Favonius Lance will be her best in slot. This insane battery stick offers her enough energy recharge and energy generation to guarantee that she will always have her burst active in every comp. On top of that, it also heavily reduces the energy requirement for her team, so much so that when she also gains the benefits of her first Constellations passive, she will be about as effective as the Raiden Shogun in terms of battery potential. This weapon is her best in slot, however, it is the only good support polearm option in the game, and is highly coveted by other characters. This is where the next two weapons come into play. The rightful reward is a free-to-play attack and HP stat stick that also restores energy to the wielder. This makes reaching all of Chevreuse caps much easier, and will turn out to be one of her best all-around options while also being free to get. Black Tassel is another stat stick Chevreuse can utilize. It makes reaching her HP cap much easier than it is for other weapons, but this also means she now has a 160% energy recharge requirement. This will usually be her worst weapon option of the ones I listed, but it does enable her full healing playstyle and works incredibly well with the Song of Days pass. As I have made clear before, Chevreuse has very powerful tools to support her team, but they all have restrictions. However, she has much more versatility than some people recognize, and I want to shed some light on it. So before we talk about synergies and team compositions, I want to discuss what the limits for her buffs are. These limits can be split into 4 different categories that get less restrictive with each category. The first and harshest restriction is being forced to use a team consisting of only Electro and Pyro units. This is the largest downgrade in her buffing potential, since if she does not fall in line with this restriction, she loses her 40% resistance shredding from her Essential 1 passive and the 12 flat energy to her team from her first Constellation. Teams that want to use Overload as their only reaction, or when she's used as a Bennett for mono Electro teams, are the only comps that would gain these benefits. The next restriction is using Overload as a reaction in any way, shape, or form. Ignoring this has Chevreuse lose out on the 40% attack boost to her Electro and Pyro party members, which is an odd restriction in a restriction. The comps she wouldn't work well with beyond this point would be any team where she's paired with an Electro unit like Electro Charge teams and in quicking comps. Up next, we have specifically Electro and Pyro party member buffs. While the last one fits here too, the bonus that gets cut off at this point is her C6's incredibly powerful 60% Pyro and Electro damage bonus. If her C6 is active, she can still be used with every Electro and Pyro DPS as their best defensive buffing support. And finally, we have her final restriction, which is none. Only her healing can be utilized by every single composition. While this may not seem like much, Furina's release made a lot of healers incredibly powerful simply by being paired with her, and Chevreuse is no different. While she might pair well with Furina, Chevreuse has other characters that benefit her and benefit from her much more. The first character that Chevreuse synergizes well with is Xiangling. Xiangling is known to be such an insanely powerful unit because of her amazing snapshotable damage output, which Chevreuse can greatly buff. On top of that, Chevreuse can reduce Xiangling's energy requirement to the base amount granted by the catch. However, what makes Xiangling so great with Chevy is Xiangling's cracked Pyro application. She offers such a stupid amount that she can single-handedly make up for what Chevy was caught lacking. Up next, we have Fischl, who works for very similar reasons. Chevy massively buffs Fischl, who snapshots all of Chevy's buffs, and Fischl offers such an insane amount of Electro application that she can work as the solo Electro applicator in all of Chevy's best teams. Yeah, I Miko is the last character of note due to her non-snapshotable skill. While she never gained much from Bennett's buffs, due to this, Chevreuse buffs are team-wide and/or constant, which is perfect for Yai's constant damage. Chevy can even reduce Yai's energy requirement by half the amount her C1 grants. Yai also has the benefit of auto-targeting enemies, which is perfect for overload teams, as she doesn't get screwed over by the knockback it produces. Yai even likes to build into a bit of elemental mastery, which means her overloads will hit harder than other characters. All of these things combined makes Yai a monster when paired with Chevreuse. While these characters benefit a lot from Chevy, they also greatly benefit from each other, which leads us to our first team comp of note. Chevreuse main overload comps are built similarly to Nilo teams. Here, you're looking for a good pyro applicator and damage dealer, as well as 2 electro characters. Using the simple core of Xiangling and Fischl will usually be enough to constantly prop overloads, as they have incredibly fast attacks with no ICD. Then slot in any pyro or electro main DPS and you're all set. Since this comp already has a significant amount of pyro damage from overload and a damage dealer, swapping out Xiangling for Beidou or even Kuki can be a very good idea if using a pyro DPS. However, some DPS units need some sort of knockback resistance to get off their application and damage, so they require a slightly different team composition. Since there are no electro units that provide this other than Beidou, whose shield is rather weak, most of these comps are forced to be triple pyro. This means Fischl will be the only one proccing overloads, while everyone else is focusing on their raw damage output. That is, unless Sino is used as the main DPS or Beidou is used as the defensive unit. However, Sino does not have good enough raw damage and Beidou's shield is incredibly flimsy, so it's usually better to focus all overloads on Fischl and to use Toma or Dea in Beidou's place. These comps also have the issue that you need 2 defensive units to make them work, which equates to a massive damage loss, especially since Xiangling is no longer on the team. There are other team comp variants that include other elements. However, in these comps, Chevreuse becomes less useful due to the removal of her res shred and flat energy generation. This leads to a heavy decrease in her buffing potential. Despite this, she is still an incredibly powerful unit for buffing pyro and electro DPS characters, especially when at C6. The first comp of note is a much more traditional version of overload teams. Here, an Anemo unit will usually have to infuse their damage with pyro in order to act as a pyro applicator, since Chevreuse can't. Otherwise, Xiangling is needed in the team. Since the Anemo unit will most likely swirl only pyro anyway, it is usually better to use Xiangling over using 2 electro units. Another variant is when using Dendro to apply pyro in an overburn team. The only benefit to this comp over that, the more basic versions, is that burning will be applied along with overload. However, these 2 reactions will normally hold priority, which is quite a shame since a good pyro sub DPS with slower application could do well here to enable some quicken reactions. Chevreuse can also work well in the Raiden variant of the national team as a replacement to Bennett. Bennett would only be buffing Xiangling in Raiden anyway, so swapping to Chevreuse won't have any massive downsides. Instead, it will just be another variant to an already good team. And finally, she can work as a very solid mono pyro or quote-unquote mono electro buffing support. Here, she can be paired with any decent mono pyro main DPS along with any combination of Kazuha, Xiangling, and Bennett in order to see success. The same can be said for electro units, except she will end up performing even better than she would in mono pyro comps. This is because her passives will be active in these teams, which allows her to act as the all-in-one buffing support she was meant to be. But with teams done, let's finish the video off with the rating. Starting off, we have Chevreuse damage output, which is, well, it's pretty awful. Her scalings are just so incredibly low, she ends up scaling better off of elemental mastery than she does by building her with the normal attack percent and crit. However, it is still some damage, so I think she earns a 1.5 out of 5 for damage output. In terms of application, Chevy has practically none. She has a massive burst of pyro at the start of a rotation, but that's it, so I'll give her a 1 out of 5 here. Chevreuse offers a lot of different damage buffs for all pyro and electro characters. She can buff their attack, shred resistances, grant damage bonuses, and reduce energy required for those units, which lets them build more into damage. Her damage buffs are so massive that she can surpass both Bennett and Kazuha in terms of damage buffing potential. She is phenomenal and deserves a 5 out of 5 in this category. Chevreuse battery potential is also rather insane. While her base energy generation is around the norm, her first constellation can reduce energy needs for pyro and electro units by around 30%. On top of this, she will normally wield Favonius Lance, which will reduce energy requirements even further. It's so much that in pure electro and pyro teams, she can serve as the only battery the team needs. However, if her first constellation is not in effect, the team's energy will suffer, though not by much, so I will give her a 4.5 out of 5 for battery potential. Chevreuse healing is massive. She has enough to keep the team team sustained with ease other than through one-shots. Even if you end up pairing her with Fiorina, she has the potential to out-heal Fiorina's health reduction, which is insane. The only thing she's missing is some sort of damage or knockback resistance. If she had that, she'd be broken. But as is, I think she earns a strong 3 out of 5. In terms of flexibility and versatility, she has a lot going for her. While she works best in 2 Pyro 2 Electro teams, at C6 she can flex into any team comp where the main focus is on Pyro and or Electro damage. This would include Aggravate, Rational, Overvape, Vaporize, and Electro Charged teams, just to name a few. In these comps, she's able to act as the only defensive and offensive support you need. The only roles she can't act in are the DPS and driver roles due to her minuscule damage output, though she can pull them off to some degree when paired with Bennett, so I think she earns a good 2.5 out of 5 here. With all that in mind, I think Chevreuse deserves an above average 3 out of 5 stars, which is oddly high for a relatively new 4-star unit, but I honestly think she deserves it. To me, Chevreuse seems like the Kuki Shinobu or Yao Yao of Fontaine. She acts as a very strong defensive support that offers incredible utility. For Kuki, that was her fast AoE Electro application and great elemental mastery scaling, which allowed her to work as one of the best Hyperbloom damage dealers in the game. Yao Yao offers great healing and incredibly versatile Dendro application, making her useful for any Dendro team out there. And then there's Chevreuse, who offers not only her healing, but also a whole smorgasbord of buffs to Pyro and Electro units. She seems incredibly strong, especially at C6, which I can't say I expected from a 4-star unit so soon, not even a year after our last overpowered 4-star unit's release, that being Yao Yao's. But those are only my thoughts on Chevreuse. What do you all think of her? Do you think she's as strong as I do? Do you think I need to tone it down a bit? Or are you undecided in your stance? Tell me all of your thoughts in the comments down below. But with that, I will wish you all farewell. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye!